Welcome everybody to Limited Level Ups. I'm Alex, and this week's episode is the March of the Machine State of the Format Address episode. These are some of my favorite episodes to do, some of your favorite episodes too, apparently, because they're some of our most popular ones. If you're joining us for this for the first time, basically these episodes are the ones I put out a few days after a new draft format comes out. I try to unload as much info about the format that I know onto you, the listeners and the watchers. I'm happy to say it's been a particularly successful format for me so far. I'm sitting at about 70% win rate in best of one for my first 10 drafts. I also did something really cool this week. I helped lead a sort of like Pro Tour boot camp with my set review partner, Mark Anderson. He hosted some drafts at his place, and we helped a bunch of constructed Pro Tour players, got them up to speed on the format. So it's almost like I've already done this episode in a lot of ways before. And of course, everything I've talked about there and my updated thoughts, a few thoughts in the interim that I've definitely updated. Want to share that with everybody here. So we're going to be talking about big picture thoughts, archetypes, color rankings, mechanics, and a smattering of other things that I think are important for success in this format. And of course, just before we jump in, I do have to shout out the Patreon, patreon.com/limited level ups. If you feel like you've gotten some value out of the show, if you feel like maybe you've won a few more drafts, go check it out. It really does help support the show. And I think this is the best time in the set release cycle to go check it out. Because of course, there's a bunch of reward tiers over there. If you want to give to us, we want to give back to you. And a bunch of ways to help you get better at the game, ranging from the coaching tier to the deck tech and draft log review tier. We have a Discord associated with the Patreon that you can put your decks in there, put your draft logs. I can take a look, starting at the $1 tier. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. All right, so let's jump in. So the way I like to do these episodes generally is start big picture, super broad, narrowing as we go. And if you were to ask me just what are my thoughts on this set, well, number one, I think it's an awesome set. I mean, asking Alex, what do you think of this new Magic set? My scale goes from like 7 to 11 basically, but I would give this set 11. Like, I think there's a ton of really good things about it. Like, I think the gameplay is excellent. The draft is super complex and deep. Like, there's a ton of playables, a lot of cool build arounds. And I've even heard like people that maybe haven't been winning as much, like, they are still having fun, right? There's some sets where, I think your win rate is definitely correlated to how much you enjoyed the format, but I've heard a lot of people be like, hey, I drafted this really cool deck, and I went 2-3, but I still had a pretty good time. But as far as, strictly strategic things go, I think it's safe to say that this is the most power-filled set we've ever had for, a standard legal draft set. The rares are really powerful, and it's going to be a point I'm going to touch on in a second. But also the uncommons. There's a ton of mega powerful uncommons, and even the commons. I think the commons definitely can compete. There's been some sets like, I don't know, Original Dominaria, where the rares and the uncommons were excellent, and the commons were like, well, you don't really want to put too many of those in your deck. I think here it's like, yeah, there's a lot of really good commons that maybe your deck is going to be filled with mostly uncommons and rares, just because you open a new pack and there's 7 uncommons and or rares in the pack, but you're pretty happy filling out the rest of your deck with commons. That's also, I think, a sign of a good format where you're not scraping for playables, and even though there are, definitely some really powerful cards, there's not a huge power level discrepancy. It's not like, whoops, I opened this A-level bomb and you didn't, and so I win. I think there's often people are going to have 2 or 3 good cards, awesome cards in their deck. And most decks, certainly you can get unlucky and you just don't see any power. But I think most decks are going to have a few A-level cards. Now, that being said, that might not be a positive for a lot of people. I know some people really enjoy kind of limited because it's a lower power way to play Magic. But I think if something you value in limited is not just, having a bad draft and just 0-3ing and then being like, well, I just didn't see any good cards. And I think that certainly happened in Phyrexial will be one quite a bit. This is not that kind of set. I think if you know how to draft it and you're keeping up with just what the good cards are, you can definitely come out of most drafts and be happy with your deck. I think the gameplay is also awesome too. There's been some really wild games I've had in this format. There's been a lot of moments where I've been like, all right, my back's against the wall and I really got to think here, but I think, I can eke it out. And, there's not, a lot of the rares don't just slam the door. They're pretty answerable. I'm not saying all of the rares are just answerable by removal, but most of them are like, all right, my opponent plays it. I get to remove it. Maybe they got a little value, but it's not insurmountable value. And I think that's another thing where it's just sometimes when the rares are really good in the set, it's the kind of value or it's the kind of rare that it comes down and the game just ends, right? Like Dreadfeast Demon from Crimson Vow. That's a really good example. I don't think that's the case here for the majority of the rares. As far as the way that the games play out, I think the format is, I don't want to call it fast or slow. If you've listened to any of my content, that I have kind of qualms with using format speed as is an indicator of like what you should be doing necessarily or how the games play out. I think it's got some issues. For example, this, I think if you ask a lot of people, they'll ask, how fast is this set? I think a lot of people will be like, oh, it's not that fast. But if you look at 17 lands, it's actually one of the fastest sets we've ever had, just under Phyrexia All will be one. But it doesn't feel that way. And I think the reason it doesn't feel that way is because games kind of have time to develop, where in Phyrexia, the key turn, the important turns were like turns 1 to 3. And if you messed those up, or you didn't have the right cards, or your opponent had cards that lined up super well against you, they could attack past you on turn 2, and then you just never could catch back up. It did feel like the game was super, super fast. Where I think here, the tension point, or the key turn, is maybe on turn 4, 5, 6, as you're figuring out what to use your removal spells on, how to navigate, maybe how to attack a battle, maybe should you go to the opponent's face. That decision is a bit more delayed, and so you do feel like it's a little bit slower, even though it's not, I said, by the numbers, by the data. The games don't end that much later than Phyrexia will be one. So I guess the way that I would kind of frame the games in this format are most decks are some variant of scaling mid-range. And what that means is just like, you want to be playing 2-drops on 2, premium 2-drops if you can. There's a bunch of really premium 2-drops that if you can start out your game right, you feel really, really good. And then as you go on, you kind of just have to keep up. And it's kind of just like classic Magic mid-range, where you're trying to make good exchanges. And another thing that pushes to like the mid-range end of the scale is battles. Because if you have an aggro deck, your plan is attack, 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 and your opponent plays a battle, well, maybe you can keep attacking. But if that battle's really good, there's sometimes you have to be like, ooh, I kind of have to block here. And, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about this in a second, but aggro decks have kind of not been so great in this format. Certainly you can tempo your opponent out, but just the pure aggression doesn't work that well. So something you should really, really value in this format is cards that play both ways, can be aggressive, can be defensive. And if you go back to my title card here with Preening Champion, which is Tuna Blue 2/2 for a flyer at common that when it enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1 blue and red elemental creature token. This is the mythic uncommon of the set, by the way. It is performing as well as Inspiring Overseer. That's how good the card is. Inspiring Overseer from Streets of New Capenna, one of the best commons we've seen in a very long time. This card is as good as that, I promise. I'm going to explain again why exactly in a second, but it's a really good example of being able to play offense if you want. It's a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, comes with a 1/1 buddy, but it also stabilizes you really well, kind of in the same way that Chimney Rabble did from Phyrexia All will be one. So all your 2-drops, all your 3-drops, all your 4, just all your cards, it's a really, really big benefit to be able to block when they need to and attack what they need to. And if you look at kind of the cards that are performing well in this format, you'll see that kind of pans out, where the cards that are purely aggressive have been not performing very well. And I think that it's a confluence of factors, but like I said, battles do play a big part of that, and just the fact that there's a wide range of types of cards you have to face. Sometimes your opponents are going to be a little more controlling, sometimes they are going to be more aggressive, and if you're slanted one way, like really far in one direction, you're gonna have some trouble. I was talking about how aggro decks have some trouble in this format. I think if you're a super reactive control deck, you kind of have some trouble too, because if you're relying on maybe a few bombs to end the game, right? Well, the removal's pretty good in this set, and so if you're not putting out threats early, those premium 2-drops like I was talking about, maybe you're playing to win with 2 or 3 good rares. Well, you really have to find ways to recur those rares, because if you don't have ways to recur your rares, your opponent's just going to have some removal rotting in their hand, and then you cast the good rare, they're going to kill it because you hadn't presented opportunities for them to cast the removal spell. So really make sure, I think, if you have your decks kind of congeal towards the center is kind of the way I would think it. And again, as you're evaluating cards, really try to make sure your cards are good in a lot of different situations. Okay, so let's talk about Preening Champion a little bit more, because I think it really does kind of highlight what makes a good card in this format. So once again, this is the 3-mana 2/2 flyer that comes along with a 1/1 blue and red elemental creature token. Well, number one, I think that something we've seen in the past little while, and something that's really just been hammered home set after set, is creatures that are like pretty good on rate and come with an additional piece of material, a token, like a blood token, or just like a creature token. Those overperform a lot of the time. Like almost every time we see these types of cards, they're really quite good. Chimney Rabble, like I mentioned in the last set. The last time we saw a card kind of like Preening Champion was in War of the Spark. It was the Even Eternal, I think it was called. It was basically the exact same card, except it didn't make a 1/1 token. It made an amassed one, which gave you a 1/1 zombie token, or you put a counter on the rest of your zombie horde. And that card was also the best common in that format. I don't think it was as good as Preening Champion, because Preening Champion has a little bit more than meets the eye as well. Not only is it just good on rates and lines up with the incentives of the format. By the way, Evasive Creatures, pretty good in this format if you have battles in your deck. But also, it's a knight, relevant creature type, and it's also a double mana creature too, or just like a creature that gives you mana if you have Convoke spells in your deck. That's a big deal as well. It also helps that blue is the best color, and maybe there's a little bit of chicken egg thing going on there. Preening Champion is as good as it is because it's supported by a lot of other blue cards, certainly. Or it's like Preening Champion, blue is good because Preening Champion's awesome. But I just do really want to highlight this card, and I know people are undervaluing it, and even if you think it's good, if you have in your head that's good, I would even bump it up a little bit more. If you go into 17 lands, this is like the, in the top 15 of cards in the set. That's counting rares, that's counting mythics, and that was the same thing with Inspiring Overseer. I think when I did the Streets of New Capenna podcast, I listed a list of like the 10 cards I would take over Inspiring Overseer, and the same thing's going on with Preening Champion. So if you see this card, you should just take it. I also want to say that, I'm of course going to be talking about a bunch of important cards in this episode, but if you're, a little bit shaky on your card evaluation, I do have a 17lands.com tier list that I put out for every single set. You can find that on my Twitter at cord_o_calls. I'll also put it in the show notes in the episode description of this episode. So if you just want like a quick, hey, what does Alex think about this card? Go check that out. It's not going to be perfect because obviously when you're drafting, it's not, you can't just paint by numbers, but I do think it helps set a good baseline, and especially in this set with, it's got like 350 cards if you can count the Multiverse Legends sheet. I think it does help to kind of get you up to speed if you're having a little bit of trouble. Okay, so like I mentioned, I just want to touch on, I think, why aggro is failing a little bit in this set, and it's a confluence of reasons. One, the red aggressive creatures are just bad. Like, if you go to the list of red commons, the spells are pretty good. You got like Volcanic Spite, the 2-mana deal 3. There's like Rouse Reinforcements, which is the 2-mana token maker, and that's more of it's not quite an aggro card. It's more of like a Convoke card. But most of the creatures that are designed to attack just don't do it very well. Like the 2-drops aren't very good. We've got like one of the 2-drop is Trailblazing Historian, the 1 in a red 1/3 haste that you can tap to give another target creature haste until end of turn. That card just isn't very good. And so when you have a creature base that isn't very good, well, you have inherent problems, right? I think white's creatures are definitely better, right? But there's also not a ton of standout white creatures. They're all solid, but none of them are anywhere close to Preening Champion or some of the better commons in black, blue, or green, which are, spoiler alert, I think some of the better colors in this set. That would be my order. There's also just, aside from the cards themselves, I think that what you face as the aggro deck, that plays a large part too. There's a lot of just stuff on the boards, right? There's, Preening Champion, like I just mentioned, but there's a lot of things that just create 2 pieces of material. Maybe it's a spell that then incubates when it dies, or just comes along with an incubate token. It's really hard to push through. There's also a decent amount of incidental life gain in the set. So, if you're just trying to push over that edge, you're just I just need that one last hit, and your opponent plays Herbology Instructor, which is 2 mana, 1 in a green, 1/3 ETBs, gain 3 life, and it's got a transform ability that transforms and kills something. It's just really, really hard to push through a lot of the more commonly played cards in the set. And also, like I said, the removal's quite good, and that also hampers the aggro decks. Aggro decks can use that removal to push through damage, but if their creatures aren't very good, and they don't hit very hard, well, you're just extending the game rather than ending it. Removal is good in aggro decks when you get something out of the way and you hit for 7, right? Or hit for a huge hit. It just doesn't happen all that often because, well, one, like I said, the creatures don't hit that hard, but 2, you remove something and they still got a token they can jump block with or something like that. So I think that aggro decks or kind of assertive decks certainly can exist. This isn't a super slow, grindy, it's just about the bombs, just about card draw. No, certainly not. It's just that red and white in particular don't do that very well. You can have really good aggressive green starts or blue starts even, because those cards are just well statted. Those are just better cards. And you do have the ability to put your opponent on the back foot. I would even encourage that. It's very good to play one of those premium 2-drops and start getting in there. but red and white just don't have the tools. It's not impossible, but I think especially right now on Arena, where I think the majority of drafters don't know that red and white aren't very good, it's just a pretty good idea to stay away from it right now. So we'll see in a few weeks. But I have not been drafting a lot of red decks. The red decks I have been drafting have been for the good spells. And when I get into white, it's usually because there's like a busted bomb like Sunfall or the Baneslayer Angel kind of variant. But most of the time, I've just found myself in blue, black, and green because I think those are the stronger colors. So with all these powerful cards running around, there's been a question I've had asked a lot. Should you splash? Or is this a set that you want to be splashing a lot in? And yes and no is the answer. So I think that there are good fixing tools. You know, you've got the lands running around at common or, you know, pseudo common. They're not really commons. They go in the specific land slot. We've got Blighted Burgeoning, which is a pretty good fixing tool. The 2 and a green aura that goes in your land incubates 2, and the land now taps for additional mana and a mana of any color. You've got like Skittering Surveyor, which is solid. You've got, you know, just a few fixing tools here and there. And it's very tempting to be like, oh, I take all the powerful cards I see and put them in my deck. And that strategy can work if your entire draft and deck is devoted to it. But what I've seen a little bit too often is people like splashing a pretty good but not great battle. Or splashing like a pretty good but not amazing gold card, right? And again, that is tempting to do because there's a lot of power flying around the table. But I think what's better is you just have a lot of powerful spells in your deck in general. So I've just found the need to splash, or the desire to splash, has been lessened. I think you're better to just have a good 2-color deck where you're not messing with your mana, because then you can get on the front foot like I was talking about, and maybe your opponent has some powerful cards or bombs in their deck. But it's still a good idea, even in this kind of mid-rangey format, to get on that front foot, not mess around with your mana, not stumble, so you can punish some bombs, right? And that's something that I would really, really hammer home. If you think that, you know, you're on the fence, like, should I splash here, should I not? I would generally say no. I think it's a good idea to have clean mana. Now, there are exceptions. The 2 exceptions I would say are if you just have a ridiculously powerful card. There is certainly a bunch of ridiculously powerful cards, especially at Mythic. I had a blue-white tempo deck the other day, and in pack 3, I opened up Zurgo and Ojutai, which is the Mythic Jeskai 5-mana 4/4 flyer that like has hexproof as long as it's entered this turn, draws you cards. That card's awesome. Did I want to splash for that card? Of course. And I think it was worth it. I picked up 2 dual lands, I picked up Skittering Surveyor, I had 4 sources in my deck, I had a little bit of card filtering too. Totally worth it in my otherwise streamlined 2-color deck. But if you're splashing for, you know, maybe something not as good as that. Like, I would say splash for A-level cards. Don't splash for B-level cards is what I would say, because you're giving up a lot of equity having to put tap lands in your deck, having to mess around with fixing your mana. The other place I would splash, and I'm going to get to this in a little bit, is I do think there's like multicolor green decks you can draft where your whole goal of your draft is pick up the fixing and pass and take the bombs people have passed to you, because there's so many good cards to go around. It's inevitable that you're gonna see some good cards in different colors, and that's a whole strategy. But again, if you're on the fence, you're like, should I splash here, should I not? I would suggest not, unless you're super confident or you have a very, very good card. And then just quickly, I want to, you know, I kind of talked about this already, but I do just really want to hammer home how important removal is in this set. You're gonna have to deal with some powerful cards, like I mentioned. You're gonna see 2 or 3 really good ones, and aside from that, you're just gonna want to have it so that you can, if you are on the front foot, use that to your advantage, remove your opponent's key threats, get out of the way, end the game so that they don't get to draw their bombs, and you don't need to have 10 removal spells, 5 removal spells, answer all their stuff. So I would be aiming for like, 3 or 4 of the premium removal spells. If you have to play maybe a slightly clunkier one, that's okay. But some sets removal is not as good because maybe the threats are very resilient to removal, or all the bombs are like card draw bombs, or like they come in and draw 3 cards or something. It's not quite the case here. And even when even when it's like, okay, they got a little bit of value, you still have to kill it because they will leave around pretty good bodies behind. So yeah, I think the best commons in the set, aside from Preening Champion, are the premium removal spells like Deadly Derision, which is the 2 black instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker, you make a treasure card. Volcanic Spite, like I mentioned before, 1 red instant, deal 3 to a battle, planeswalker or creature. Then you can take a card from your hand, put it on the bottom of your library, you draw a new card. That card's great too. So just, hammering that home. I'm sure this is not a shock to anybody, but I did want to bring it up. All right, and that brings us to the color rankings of this set. I think this is pretty important, actually. Sometimes I think color rankings aren't that important for sets, but I do think it's really good to frame the set in why each color is good and what they offer to your strategies, so the different kind of strategies in this format. And this is going to lead us into the top commons and the reasons you want to be in each color. So just to like spell it out here, best color, blue. I feel very confident about that. Next best color is black, and this is something big that we got wrong in the set review. I think we actually got quite a bit right in the set review, but I do think that black is one of the big overperformers. Then we have right in the middle, green, and then I think we have a reasonable gap with white and red. And yeah, by the way, none of these colors are unplayable. If you've got the right cards, and this is what's great about a set with really powerful rares and uncommons, I'm mostly talking about at the common level here, right? You can still have a really good white deck if you open a few bombs, or you get past a bomb, or maybe later in the format once people kind of go, I don't really want, I know red's not that good, they'll pass you that Atali pick one, pack one. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, I don't know. But that's kind of a feature of the format, I think, where you open an awesome red bomb, and normally, like, I've just been drafting a bunch of blue-black, because blue-black's been super open, people haven't quite caught on how good it is. But red, while has some structural problems, still has some good cards, and especially when you open those higher rarity cards, you can move in. Okay, so we're going to start with blue here, and blue is not only really powerful, it's just got, 4 or 5 really awesome cards at the top commons, but it's really deep as well. You have to go to like the 10th or 11th blue common to get to a point where I'm like, I would prefer this card isn't in my deck. So, number 1, Printing Champion. I don't have to hammer that home anymore. Number 2, gotta shout out my set review partner, Mark, Afara's Dispersal. So this is the 2 and a blue instant. This spell costs 2 less to cast if it targets an attacking creature, and the effect is return target creature to its owner's hand, surveil 2. So if you didn't catch the set review and you're going, why is this card good? Like, I wouldn't pick this out as a powerful card. And when I say good, it's good. It's performing at about the level as at the top uncommons and some of the good rares too. Like, this is a fantastic common. This is the second best common in the set in my mind. The reason it's good is it's very similar to like a Tolarian Geyser, right? 3 mana instant, or that was a sorcery. Return target creature to its owner's hand, you draw a card, and this is an instant. Surveil 2 is not quite draw a card, but it's not worse than draw a card. It's just different. It's worse because you don't get the card right away, and it is, card disadvantage to some extent. But it digs deeper than drawing a card. Digging 3 cards deep is really large, especially when you have bombs in your deck. You have really powerful cards. Digging there, just being able to set up your land drops, making sure you're not missing land drops, which I think is really important in this format. But that 1 mana mode, man, is this so good when your opponent, and this is why I think why the red-white backup decks have some issues. It's like, all right, I'm going to back up on my creature, and I go to attack, and I attack the battle, or I cast a removal spell to get something out of the way, and you're investing all these resources, and your opponent just goes, 1 mana, Afara's Dispersal, that goes back to your hand, your 4-drop goes back to your hand, and I surveil 2. Not only can it do that, but it targets your own things too. If you have a good enter the battlefield effect, you can re-trigger that. You can save your creatures if they go for a removal spell. I've been talking a lot in the past few sets about how I think people just chronically undervalue these kind of card advantage-y bounce spells. Like we've seen the 4 mana bounce something, draw a card, those kind of spells. And this is very similar to that while having that cost reduction. So just an excellent card. Next blue common here we have is Eyes of Gataxias. So this is 3 and a blue for a sorcery, incubate 3, and then draw a card. And I haven't read Incubate just yet in this episode. Just as a reminder, when you incubate, you create an incubator token with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and then you can pay 2 at some point at instant speed, transform it, and it'll flip up, and it'll be like, a 3/3 creature. And this is pretty similar to Sorrel's Packmate or any of these like creatures that come in and draw a card. It's nice that you can do it in installment plans. You can cast this on turn 3 if you're not under a lot of pressure, and then next turn you can flip it up. Very modular. You can kind of, it's very nice to be able to divide your mana in that way, and it's just panned out to be a pretty good card. I don't think it's that's complex of a card. It's just really solid. And the hits keep coming. Another good interaction spell here, Temporal Cleansing, 3 and a blue for a sorcery. It's got Convoke. The owner of target non-land permanent puts it in their library second from the top or on the bottom. Another thing that I think is a little bit undervalued by the masses is these kind of effects. They'll put your thing on top of your opponent's library, right? I think a lot of people don't quite clock that you're 1-for-1ing. It's not card disadvantage. If you have to redraw that, this is the exact kind of card that feels really backbreaking a lot of the time. The Convoke on this card, don't overlook that, right? Because a lot of the time you're just gonna go, I have 4 or 5 mana and I get to cast a creature and Convoke with that creature in the same turn. So this really only costs 2 or 3 mana, sometimes 1 a lot of the time, depending on the board state. So don't overlook this one. This was actually one that I overlooked on the first day or 2 of the format, and then I started playing with it more. I'm like, oh, no, this is the real deal. This is a really good interaction spell. Next up in blue, we have Saiba Cryptomancer, another kind of sleeper here. So this is 1 and a blue for an 0/1 flash hexproof with backup 1. And of course, when you back up, you give the thing you back up, put the counter on hexproof. So this looks like kind of a throwaway, trinkety, why do I care about this card kind of card. The reason this card's good is it's very modular. There's so many spots that you want this effect. So at a baseline, it's a protection spell. It's a 2-mana protection spell that protects a bomb, protects a key threat, or, forget about protecting anything like super important. If you just have a 4/4 and your opponent goes, all right, I'll spend 4 mana to kill that. It's so backbreaking to just go 2 mana. Nope. I also, not only do I not get my creature removed, that creature gets a counter, and I have this Cryptomancer sitting around that can be used to convoke or sacrifice, or there's like a flying aura at uncommon, Astral Wings, I think it's called, that gives the creature +2/+2, and you draw a card when it enters, and that card also has convoke. And this is like a hexproof vessel for that. Also, just like having this trump blocker lying around, and for the thing that really snapped this card into going from me going, oh yeah, it looks pretty good, like it's solid protection spells, to going, oh no, it's even better than that, is when I won a combat with it for the first time. I attacked my 3/3 into their 3/3. I won the combat, and I was left around with this 0/1 that, again, is a piece of material that I could do something with. And one more broad concept that I think we've really come to learn in the past few years of Limited is just anything that makes 2 pieces of material, whether that be a token or just like, here in this case, you're winning a combat, you're getting this 0/1 that you can then do something with. That's a really big deal. So don't overlook this card. It's also really good with flyers, because often your opponent's way of interacting with flyers is removal spells. So you hold this up and you get to get them with this. This is a card that I would be happy playing 2 of in a lot of my blue decks. So don't overlook this. It's gonna go late, so you don't have to take it early, but definitely don't overlook it. And then the last blue common I want to talk about here, I could go on and on about blue commons, but the last one I'm choosing to talk about here is Title Terror. So this is 4 blue for a 5/6, and when it attacks, you can tap 2 untapped creatures you control, and if you do, Title Terror can't be blocked this turn. It also has Island Cycling for 2 mana. This is the best of the cycle, I would say, even over the white one, which is, we're going to get to in a minute, but it isn't actually all that impressive in my mind. This one's just giant. It comes down, it blocks everything, and I think like it finally got the giant sea creature at common right? It blocks well, it closes up the game really quickly. Back in the day, you had these giant sea creatures that like your opponent had to control an island for it to attack or something. Like, this is not, we're not living in those days anymore. This is just a good card. It ends the game quite quickly, and Island Cycling is nice too, right? Just being able to hit your land drops. Like I mentioned, hitting your land drops is really important in the kind of mid-range games that happen in this format, so don't overlook this one. You don't want to be playing infinite of them. I'm pretty happy with one of them at the top end, but I am happy with that first one for sure. All right, now moving on to black. So black's top common is the one I already mentioned here, Deadly Derision. 2 black for an instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker, create a treasure token. Not only is this gonna kill anything, it also makes that treasure token, which helps you ramp, helps you fix, right? It's a fixing source. And there's also ways to sacrifice artifacts in the set, like our next common here, Final Flourish, which is 1 and a black for an instant. It's got Kicker, sacrifice an artifact or a creature. The base effect is target creature gets a -2/-2 until end of turn, and if the spell was kicked, that creature gets a -6/-6 until end of turn. So there's a bunch of, like, just like I mentioned, a bunch of material things lying around, artifacts, token, 1/1 tokens that sometimes the -2/-2 for 2 mana, you just fire that off in turn 2. That's great. But then it's just a catch-all removal spell, or almost catch-all removal spell in the late game too. So this is black's strength, of course, is just dealing with those bombs. But it also, not only that, it's really good at recurring your own bombs. And black's got just 5, 6, 7, 8 A-level bombs. The next common here, Unsealed Necropolis, helps you get those bombs back. So this is 2 and a black for an instant. Each player mills 3 cards, then you return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Card's fantastic. The milling 3 gives you selection. So much of the time, these games come down to, all right, we're grinding. I kill your thing, you kill my thing. I trade my stuff off in combat. Maybe you did deal with my bomb, and then your opponent casts an Unsealed Necropolis, and you go, all right, well, I just can't beat that because I used all my resources to deal with yourself the first time, basically. I would play 2 copies of this card if you had like any graveyard synergies, or just if you had powerful cards, but the first copy is an auto-include in all of my black decks. And just like blue, black's really deep too, so it doesn't stop there. Nezumi Informant. 1 and a black for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. So this is the kind of card that we've seen pretty often in the past little while. Virus Beetle was when it was at its best, when there was ninjas in the mix. And then, we had some sets where it's like wasn't a card we really cared about. In this set, the reason you like it, well, there's multiples, but one of them is your opponents will often be hesitant to discard lands in this set because there's a lot of places to put your mana. So often they're faced with a tough decision of, do I want to discard a spell? Do I want to discard a land here? Like, lands are valuable. It's not like, if this card was in Phyrexia, will be one. Your opponent goes, all right, I'll discard my 6th land. I don't care. But if they're sitting with an Atali in hand or a Breach to the Multiverse, and they've got like 4 lands in play and 1 in hand, they probably have to discard a spell at that point. And also, there's a lot of good ways to sacrifice your creatures, and this is just a piece of material that lies around, sacrifice for value. Also, not a bad thing to go buy back with the Necropolis, Unseal the Necropolis. So definitely one of Black's better commons. I'm happy just with multiples of these. If you can play multiple of these, have ways to sack them, have ways to recur them, that's good. Vanquish the Weak. 2 and a black, instant, destroy target creature with power 3 or less. Not as good as the other 2 removal spells, but certainly solid. And Ichor Drinker as our last black notable common here. Single black mana for a 1/1 lifelink. You can pay black and exile it from your graveyard to incubate 2. Activate that only as a sorcery. Nothing super special here. 1 mana, 1/1 lifelink. Gets in for a few hits, but it's just a good thing to sacrifice. Good thing to trade off. Once again, I sound like a broken record. I'm sure I'm going to keep saying this, but it's just 2 pieces of material, and that's super important in these mid-range games that you're going to be facing draft in, draft out. All right, moving on to some green cards here. My top green common is Overgrown Pest, or at least, so that's the common I think you should draft the highest. So this is 2 and a green for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You can reveal a land or a double-faced card from among them. Put that card into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in any order. So this is very similar to like Contagious Vorak from the last set, but being able to hit a spell off this in the late game, that's awesome. And remember, double-faced cards, not just battles, but also those flip Phyrexians that transform with Phyrexian mana. It helps you find your colors if you're splashing, just a good little roadblock. Nice little 2-for-1. I don't think I have to explain why this card's good too much, but it is definitely has performed like you might have expected it to. Then we've got Cosmic Hunger. Simple card. 1 and a green instant. Target creature you control deals this damage to a creature, planeswalker, or a battle. Just a solid removal spell. Blighted Burgeoning. So this is the mana fixer I talked about earlier. 2 and a green for a aura. Incubate 2 when it enters, and the enchanted land, when you tap it, its controller adds 1 additional mana of any color. Sometimes we see these effects, and they're not very good, but Incubate 2 on this, that's a really, really big deal, because when you cast this on turn 3 in your, like, multicolored green deck, and mind you, this isn't just, like, don't just put this in, like, your red-green deck, unless you're splashing. You want to be splashing to play this card. But if you are splashing, it's a good tool, and part of the problem with these cards is when you draw them in the late game, they don't really do anything, right? But even just an Incubate 2 token, like, that's enough to make it be like, okay, it's not like I drew a land, right? I drew something that's going to be relevant here. So this is a pretty solid card. A few other things here, Arachnoid Adaptation. This is a single green mana for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains reach until end of turn, untap it. So we usually see this effect for an whole additional mana. 1 mana for this card is really, really nice. So not only does it protect against like other fight spells or against burn a lot of the time, but a lot of the time your opponents are tapping out pre-combat because of battles in this set, or they're casting in their blue-white night deck, they want to cast like their lord or something that comes in, like they're casting a removal spell to get something out of the way. And defensive combat tricks are usually not a very good idea in most limited sets, because often they go to attacks when they have all their mana up, and you're like, all right, I'm hoping to win this combat, and then they cast a removal spell and blow you out. But when your opponents are tapping out in their main phase 1 a lot of the time, this for 1 mana allows you to, it almost does an Afara's Dispersal impression, where you go like, all right, 1 mana, I untap my thing, I eat your creature. And nothing to say of course, just like being able to use this as a 1 mana +2/+2 trick that gives your creature pseudo vigilance. So this isn't, in the stats in 17 lands, this is actually one of the top performing commons, and it might actually be the number 1 if I remember correctly. You don't have to take it that highly, and that's why I said, the pest, I think you should draft that higher. But this is a card that if you see 7th, 8th pick, don't just think of it as a throwaway combat trick. This is the real deal. This is going to help you in those tight combat situations, in those really tricky parts, spots in the game where your opponent does have that really good early start. They've got you on the back foot. This is a 1 mana way to flip the script on them a little bit. Then we've just got some solid creatures here. Wary Thespian, 1 and a green for a 3/1. When it enters the battlefield or dies, you surveil 1. Converter Beast, 3 green for a 0/1 that incubates 5 when it enters. Again, just another thing that makes 2 things. And then we've got kind of a funny one, Seed of Hope. So, this is a single green mana for an instant. You mill 2 cards, then you can put a permanent card from among those milled cards into your hand. You gain 2 life. So, I said that Combat Trick or Arachnoid Adaptation might be the top performing green common in 17 lands right now. It's actually Seed of Hope. And mind you, smallish sample size, we're in like under 1,000, but that's still meaningful. And that's enough to kind of just ask, okay, well, what's going on here? Why is this card doing as well as it is? And this is a card that I advocated for before the set came out. And a lot of people are like, oh, this card looks really, really terrible. There's cards that have kind of been like this before, like Adventurous Impulse, to like green mana, look at the top 3, you can take a permanent, or I think it was like a land or a creature. And the reason this card is a little bit different is that in this set, your decks have a very high permanent count. So in like Strixhaven or some sets where there's a lot of good spells, your deck kind of looked artificially non-creature heavy. Like you'd be like in Strixhaven, for example, you'd be like 8 real creatures and a lot of non-creatures, but those non-creatures were like token makers or learn lesson cards that went and get a token maker. In this set, because of battles and there's a decent number of like enchantment-based removal spells that of course are permanents, your counts of non-creatures in the set are kind of at an all-time low. A lot of decks in this set have like, maybe their non-creature spells are just their removal spells. So you've got like 4 or 5. And when that's the case, this card consistently becomes 1 mana, you look at the top 2 cards, you take 1, and you gain 2 life. So it's like a better consider in a lot of ways, right? The single blue mana, you look at the top card of your library, you can put it in the graveyard, and then you draw a card. And that card's like a perfectly fine playable, just kind of like filter yourself, put some stuff in the grave. This also has graveyard synergies if you have stuff that can get stuff back from the graveyard. And don't overlook that gain 2 life. Like, I think if you had a card that just said single mana, draw a card, gain 2 life, I think that would be a pretty decent card in a lot of your limited decks. Like, the gain 2 life, that means that you're just like, give yourself a little bit of life buffer. And obviously I wouldn't play multiple of them, but the first one, reducing your deck size by 1 and gaining 2 life, like, that's a pretty decent trade-off. It's an instant 2 for what it's worth. When you're spending mana to not affect the board, they gain 2 is a really big deal. And of course, the card selection is huge. When you see 2 permanents, you're like, all right, well, I get to choose the best of the 2. And often, once again, I'm going to bring it up, there's a lot of good cards in your deck in this format, so finding them more often is something that's good. Now, where do you want to play this card? When do you want to take it? Well, you don't want to play multiples. I think 2 at the max, basically, because you just can't afford to, like, wheel spin all day. But the first copy is going to be good in your decks with, I would say, if you have 5 cards that this misses, that's acceptable, because I think you have like a 2% chance on 5 cards that you'll whiff completely. You won't find, you look at the top 2, it's 2 spells, right? But if you hit 1 spell and 1 non-land, well, you're pretty happy with that. And that's that card I described, just like draw a card, gain 2 life. And if you actually get that selection, that's a really, really good deal. It's better than a consider at that point. I think you should replace a land with this card, generally, especially if your deck is somewhat low curve. But I could also see you just playing this as like your 23rd spell. That would be perfectly acceptable in a lot of spots. So don't overlook this one. This is one that I've been including in a lot of my green decks. All right, moving on to white here. So we've got kind of a collection of what I would describe as solid creatures. Like I mentioned before, none of the white cards are all that standout-y. So the top common in my mind is Knight of the New Coalition. 2 and a white for a 2/2 Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, you make a 2/2 Vigilant Knight token, a blue and white one, which is actually notable that it's blue, because that helps with your blue Convoke creatures. I think if you're going to play white, you want to pair it with blue. I think blue-white is the best white deck, and it's actually one of the better decks in the format. So anything that says Knight is going to get a little bit of a boost for me. Swordsworn Cavalier is another one. 1 and a white, 3/1. When a Knight enters the battlefield, this gains first strike. Another one that's not a Knight, but definitely has been a bit of an overperformer, is Bola Slinger. 3 and a white for a 2/2, backup 1. When this creature attacks, tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls. And this is a card that, again, kind of like Seed of Hope. I was advocating for this card going into the set. A lot of people are like, it looks kind of junky. I think a lot of people were comparing this card to, like, Fiendbinder from Shadows over Innistrad Remastered, which is a 4-mana 3/2 version of this card with no backup. Or, we saw like Disturbing Geist from Crimson Vow. It was like a 3-mana 2/1 with this ability. The difference between this card and those cards is that critical third toughness. Because when you attacked with those other cards, it was just like, all right, you got in 1 attack and you tapped on my thing, but then I block your thing and it just dies. And we go back to maybe you not being able to get it into an attack. This one, if you just play it as a 4-mana 3/3, that third point toughness really matters. It makes it a lot more difficult for your opponent to have a good blocker at that point of the game, especially if you do happen to have a combat trick or a removal spell. That means that you're going to get multiple attacks in with this. And of course, backup matters a lot too. Getting that kind of like a hasty ability on that. So it definitely is a card that you should include in your white deck. It's kind of tricky because these, I'm pointing out 2 cards here. Knight of the New Coalition and Bullet Slinger, both 4-drops. You can't play infinite 4-drops in your white aggro decks, but these are some of the better ones. But the stars of the show in white are not actually the creatures, I think. They're the combat tricks. So 2 combat tricks we have here. Aerial Boost and Angelic Intervention. So Aerial Boost is 1 and a white for an instant with Convoke. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains flying until end of turn. This card is deceptively powerful. I already talked about how defensive combat tricks get a little bit of a boost in the set because you can, especially because you go, I have no mana, but I have creatures, and they go for an attack, and you're like, all right, block, boost, you lose your creature. Maybe they tapped out for something pre-combat. You feel very okay about doing that. But it also has the benefit of, like all other Convoke cards, you get to maybe tap a creature, save a mana here or there. Maybe this only costs 1 mana. Maybe it costs no mana, and you get to cast like a 5-drop in the same turn. And this card helps you not only win those tight combat situations, but just, jumps over for the last few points. Maybe flips a battle if you have one. Although, as we're going to get to in a little bit, I don't think battles are at their best in white aggressive decks. Then Angelic Intervention is the 1 and a white protection spell. Instant. Target creature or planeswalker you control gains protection from colorless until end of turn or the color of your choice. You put a counter on it. This card is, we've seen this kind of effect before. They generally are pretty good. It's kind of like Cyber Cryptomancer, the hexproof backup creature. Plays a little bit similar to that. And the reason I say that these cards are the star of the show is the creatures are kind of interchangeable, to be honest, in your white aggro decks. Like, yes, there's some that are better than others, but these are your main good tools for pushing damage. Your white aggro decks are just about playing some stuff on the board. Again, it's kind of interchangeable, and then it's going attack, 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 and you've got multiple of these tricks to back them up, so they never have a good block. And I'm happy playing, 4 or 5 of them, I think. In probably more aerial boost than interventions, I think, because getting to 2/2/2 wins a lot of combats, and then getting to go okay, my last 2, I jump my 2 things and kill you. I think this card is key to your white aggro decks, and I will play multiples. Now, noting some kind of underperformers in white here, just quickly. Not necessarily underperformers in general, but definitely in your white aggro decks. Cut Short. This is 2 and a white for a instant with Convoke. Destroy target planeswalker that was activated this turn, not as relevant, or tap creature, that's the relevant part, and Alabaster Host Intercessor. So this is the 6 mana, 5 and a white, 3/4, plane cycling for 2 mana, and when it enters the battlefield, you can exile target creature an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. So these cards are currently being taken, according to 17 lands, very, very highly. Generally, these destroy tapped creature effects are overrated by the general arena populace, because it's it's removal, it's pretty efficient. But of course, the problem is, in your white decks, you don't want to kill the tapped things. You want to kill the things, you want to get things out of the way. And so Cut Short is a good card if you happen to be a slower white deck, black-white with some bombs, or blue-white or something where you have some flyers, that's okay too. But don't play this in your white aggro deck. I just wanted to point that out. And then Alabaster Host Intercessor. So I played this card quite a bit in the first few days of the format, and I realized that it's just not what the white aggro decks want. I mean, it's a 6-drop, first of all. Obviously, that's something that is going to bring it down a little bit. But the problem with it is, yes, it's a removal spell. It gets rid of something. And if you snag a token, like a incubate token, you feel pretty good. But if you don't, and you're forced to get something else out of the way, you now have this 6-drop that's a little bit of a liability, and you don't really want to attack or block with it. So where it is good is where you can control the game, you're not going to be under that much pressure to block with it, and maybe the board is clear so you don't mind attacking with it. I think that's where you want it. But it's not a white aggro card, and don't take it and don't play multiples in your white aggro deck. I think 1 is fine, just don't take it highly. And kind of a notable exception here is Realm Breaker's Grasp, but not on the top common list for me. 1 and a white for an aura, enchant artifact or creature. The enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So in the past, these kind of pacify or rest style cards have been kind of sketchy sometimes if they're sets with sacrifice themes or blink themes, and then sometimes they're really good. Sometimes there's just that stuff isn't around, or the sacrifice cards aren't good, so they don't get played. We're back to the kind of set where it's there's enough sacrifice outlets, there's some blink, there's enough things that does punish this. You put this on one of your opponent's creatures and they can still use it to convoke, which is a little bit awkward, right? And like I was saying with the red cards, the white cards do hit a little bit harder than the red cards, but you don't want too much removal in your white decks, because if you're just a handful of removal spells and you're casting this and you go, all right, attack for like, 5 maybe, instead of like a giant hit, because, your white creatures are pretty small still, you're extending the game rather than prolonging that. You'd just rather play another creature or cast one of those awesome combat tricks like I was saying, because those help you keep attacking. Sometimes when you draw a Realmbreaker's Grasp, you go, sorcery speed, I put this on your thing, and you now know that you can't block with that, but you still have the option to block with other things, right? And you rather just have the combat trick where it's like, attack all. How are you gonna block, right? You might have multiple tricks in hand. So these tricks are just better tools for pushing damage than Realmbreaker's Grasp. And it does kind of have structural issues in the format where it is a liability a lot of the time. All right, and now we finally get to red. So Volcanic Spite, the 2-mana deal 3, that's the top common. Card's excellent. Then the next two here are Ral's Reinforcements, which is the 2-mana, 1 red, create 2, 1/1 blue and red elemental creature tokens, and Marauding Dreadship, 2 and a red for a 4/1 haste vehicle. Then when it enters the battlefield, you incubate 2 and you crew 2. So just to talk about Ral's Reinforcements first, this is a fantastic card in the Convoke deck. It's exactly what the Convoke deck wants. It blocks X1s on the opponent's battlefield really well. It gives you 2 quote-unquote mana dorks for your Convoke creatures. And then Marauding Dreadship is just a little bit better than it looks. It looks a little bit funky if you haven't played with it. But the way this plays out is you play your 2-drop, maybe it's even Ral's Reinforcements, you attack with this thing as a 4/1, you crew it right away, and then you're left with an incubate token. Or you play on turn 5, you get to incubate right away, you flip into a 2/2, you attack with a 4/2 haste, you're left behind with a 2/2 token. And once again, I'm going to say it, say it with me here, 2 pieces of material, right? Rectangle theory, for those who listen to Lords Limited. That might be another way to put it. And that is definitely going to take this card from just being like, okay, an okay vehicle, to, hey, you're actually generating value on this card. All right, so those are the colors at common. Now let's move into some mechanics, just kind of talking about how each mechanic has played out. No better place to start than the battles, the headliner of this set. And, the question on everybody's mind has been like, are these good, or are these bad? And the unfortunate answer is, it kind of depends. I can give you a pretty good heuristic, though. And that's, battles are way better in controlling decks than they are in aggressive decks. So once again, I got to give a shout out to my set review partner, Mark, who did point this out in the set review, and his prediction definitely came true. The reason that battles are not very good in your aggro decks is you just can't really afford to send your things at the battles instead of your opponent's face. You gotta be pressuring your opponent's life total, not trying to grind out value with the battles. Because when it comes down to it, the battles are grindy cards. They're value generating cards. Like, sometimes the front side is good enough to just play, and you're like, hey, I'm happy with the front side, and maybe I'm low on resources and I attack a battle so that I can get a few more resources, have more stuff to attack my opponent with. But unfortunately, a lot of the more aggressive battles don't. The front sides aren't very good. So, for example, we've got Invasion of Belanon, which is an appealing looking card. 2 and a white for a 5 defense battle. And when it enters, you make a 2/2 token, 2/2 night token, which is a little bit definitely understated. The backside is your creatures get +1/+1. That's a really appealing thing on the backside. The problem with it is your opponent's going to have blockers. They're going to have removal spells. You're going to have to play a game where your opponent's interacting. You can't just get this glorious anthem effect just willy-nilly. And so when you're devoting your combat tricks and your attack steps to this, yeah, your creatures are definitely going to be better. But it ends up the juice ends up not being worth the squeeze, right? And you'll actually see that on a lot of the white battles. They've just panned out to be not very good at all. For example, we've got Invasion of Kylem, which is 2 red-white for a 5 defense battle. That it gives, when it enters the battlefield, it gives 2 creatures +2/+0, and vigilance and haste until end of turn. Invasion of Moog is the 2 green-white one that puts counters on all of your creatures. These cards are, on 17 lands, these are actually some of the actual worst cards in the set. And that's because I think exactly what I was talking about. You just can't really afford to be putting these cards in your deck that, yeah, they help you, they do help you push damage a little bit, and the front sides are definitely passable to some extent. But there's game states where you got just 2 creatures. Your opponent's killed your first creature, you play a 3-drop, maybe you play a 4-drop, you don't have any more creatures, and you got this invasion. It's like, all right, 4 mana, put 2 counters on something. Now, I will, mind you, there are some really good combos with this card. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But for the most part, I found this card to be very awkward because it's hard to have a board state where, if the game's gone really long, maybe you have the board style and you put a bunch of counters on your creatures and it's pretty good. But in most board states, you're putting like 2 or 3 counters on your creatures. Same with Kylum. It's like, all right, +2/+0, I'll just block still. It doesn't actually help your creatures attack that well. And then you can't devote, any time to flipping to the backsides, which are pretty good, but you just can't give up that damage. You can't give your opponent life. And this is mostly applying to the uncommon battles. There's definitely some rare battles that you should just always play. And I think a lot of them, most of them, you should play. But as far as the uncommon ones, I'm just not that interested in my aggro decks. Now, for your controlling decks, man, are there some good ones. So the number 1 performing uncommon in this set is my top uncommon is Invasion of Amonkhet. 1 blue-black for a 4 toughness battle. When it enters the battlefield, each player mills 3 cards, then your opponent discards a card, you draw a card. All right, that's already some card advantage, and you're milling, you're fueling your graveyard. Of course, it helps that it's blue-black, and blue-black are the best 2 colors. The backside is a 4/4 that, it's a clone. It comes in as a copy of anything in a graveyard, and it's a 4/4 instead of its printed power and toughness. This card's awesome because you play it at some point. Maybe you play it on turn 5 with an interaction spell or a creature to block with. Often, sometimes you just play it on turn 3 and you don't feel too bad about it. And then it just kind of sits there and your opponent has to respect it. And it's like, well, I don't want to let them flip this because it's like, all right, cause they get the best thing in the graveyards. Maybe you milled like a 6-drop or something with a good enter the battlefield effect, or heaven forbid a rare. And this is why, I like I said at the beginning of the show, the aggressive decks have a really tough time because your opponent plays an Invasion of Amonkhet. And you're like, all right, I'm an attacking deck. They play the invasion, you're like, well, I have to block. Like, I can't let them do this, right? This card is fantastic. If you haven't played with it, highly recommend it. Very, very excellent. Definitely an underrated card right now. People are not taking this card where they should. I've had like 3 of them before, and I've been very happy with them. Oh, also another note. How many battles you want to play? I think even in your more controlling decks, closer to like 3 or 2, many more, you get to the point where it's like, I can't actually flip all of them in a reasonable amount of time. So you do run into that issue. But the first 3, I think, in your controlling decks are really, really good. Just to point out a few other ones, Invasion of Eldraine. This is one that I think caught a lot of people by surprise that it's actually pretty good. 3 black for a 4 defense battle. When it enters the battlefield, you discard 2 cards. And the backside is Prickle Fairies. It's a 2/2 flyer that if your opponent has 2 or fewer cards in hand on their upkeep, they lose 2 life. And just like with Nezumi Informant, the 2-mana 1/1 that makes them discard a card, same kind of thing. Your opponent doesn't want to discard lands with this thing, so a lot of times they have to make that tough choice of maybe they do discard a land, maybe they discard another spell. The Mighty Rod effect is powerful in this format. Another pretty good one here is Invasion of Asgul. So this is red-black for a 4 defense battle. When it enters the battlefield, target player sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker, and they lose a life. The backside is a 2/1 menace that whenever a permanent goes to the battlefield, or sorry, if a permanent has gone to the battlefield, this is the end of turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Black-red is kind of funny enough, not a very aggressive deck in this format. Like I was mentioning, black is pretty grindy and red's aggressive creatures aren't very good. And so this is just like a cheap edict that then turns into a reasonable threat later on. So all of the black battles, or at least the majority of them, are pretty safely good because black and blue are grindy colors. They're slower colors. Evasion plays well with the battles too, so that's kind of nice. If you have any evasion, that's another little tip. Like, I mean, it's an obvious tip, of course, but definitely does stand true. Something that a lot of people anticipated. If you have battles, you want evasion. Again, just really threatening. Your opponent doesn't want you out of the backside of these battles. One thing I will say about the aggressive battles too is they become passable if you've got evasion. If you've got like, you know, some 3-mana 2/2 flyers, or, you know, 2-mana 2/1 flyer if you're lucky. That makes it so that, okay, yes, you have to attack not their face, but if you play that Invasion of Belanon and you attack the battle, you get that anthem in a few turns. That's actually not bad. The problem comes when you have to like trade off your creatures to then get the anthem, because then you're left with no creatures and an anthem, and that doesn't work. So, not that the battles are unplayable in aggressive decks, they're just a lot worse and require a lot more setup. You need evasion for them to be playable. And I mentioned how the black battles are a little bit better than the other ones, and one of the things that makes them a little bit better is 2 cards here. Render Inert, which is an uncommon, 2 and a black for a sorcery. Remove up to 5 counters from target permanent, draw a card. And Etched Host Doombringer, 4 and a black for a 3/5. When it enters the battlefield, you can either drain your opponent for 2, or choose a battle. If you are defending it, you put 3 counters on it, so you make your opponent's battle harder to flip. Or you can take 3 battles off of one, or 3 counters off of one that you've cast. So anytime you can flip a battle outside of combat, not have to, worry about, oh, do I have enough creatures to attack? Do I have a good attack? You just get to go render inert, flip my battle, draw a card. It feels busted. Honestly, it really does. And I don't think Host Doombringer is a card I'm like thrilled to play in general, but if I have 3 battles, I'll happily put it in there. And render inert, I think you do want battles in your deck to play it. Like 2 battles would be on my minimum. But if you don't have your battles in the battlefield, you can still kill a Phyrexian and incubated token. That's really good. 3 mana, kill a thing, draw a card. You're pretty happy with that exchange. So, long story short, battles, good in controlling decks, not so good in the aggressive decks. Oh, I should also clarify. When I say controlling, I don't necessarily mean like hard control. I just mean like, those more mid-range decks like I've been talking about. All right, our next mechanic here is the flip Phyrexian. So this is the cycle of creatures. There's a cycle of 5 at common and then a bunch more uncommon where there's something on the front side and then you can pay some amount of mana and Phyrexian mana, flip them into something sweet on the back side. And my big tip for these is that there's a pretty big divide between the cheap ones to flip. They cost like 3 in a Phyrexian, maybe 4 in a Phyrexian in some cases, and the ones that are like 5 in a Phyrexian, like those are really, really painful. So just to talk about some of the more premium ones, these are like top uncommons in the set. You should take these very, very highly. Captive Weird, single mana for a defender, 1/3, 3 in a Phyrexian red. You transform it. The backside is a 3/3, and when it transforms into the backside, you exile the top card of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you can play that card. This card is just fantastic for a variety of reasons. I think this card is very underrated right now. I get this card passed to me quite a bit pretty late. And number one, it's a cheap body for blocking purposes or convoke purposes, right? Like any 1 mana card that's a creature in this set, it's always going to get a little bit of a boost because it can help you convoke your blue cards or your red cards too. But this card is almost like, you want to think about it like an awakened, a static awakener from Midnight Hunt, if you remember that card. That card was a single black mana for a 1/1 that you could pay 3 and a black mana, sacrifice a creature, transform it into a 4/4, you drew a card. This card is very similar to that, and that card was awesome, by the way, one of the top commons if you hadn't played that set. It's like that card, except you have to pay, some life instead of paying, sacrificing a creature. And, you get a 3/3 instead of a 4/4, but that's still fantastic. This card is phenomenal. Another great one, Skyclave Aerialist, 1 in a blue for a 2/1 flyer. It's got the transform cost of 4 in a Phyrexian green, flips into a 2/4 flyer, and when it transforms into the Aerialist, you look at the top card of your library. If it was a land, you put it on the battlefield. If it wasn't, you just draw it, you put it into your hand. So this one kind of bucks the trend a little bit. I was saying, like, 4 in Phyrexian is a little bit expensive, but I think another way to evaluate these cards is if you're fine with the front side is just good, then the backside doesn't matter as much. And this one's definitely, 2/1 flyer for 2 mana. That's phenomenal, especially if you do have some battles in your deck. Another good one, I've been mentioning earlier in the show, I was mentioning just like these premium 2-drops, and here they all are. Blight Reaper Thalid. 2 mana, 1 in a black for a 2/2. It's got a 3 in a Phyrexian green transform cost. When it transforms into a 3/3 that comes along with a 1/1 Saproling friend, and then when this dies, you also get a Saproling. Just great, like a lot of the times you'll just flip this on turn 3. You're like, all right, attack you with my 3/3. I have a 1/1 back. Maybe you have a X1 and I get to block. If they want to remove this, like one of the problems with like flipping these early in the game is that you flip them, you get the cool backside, and they cast a removal spell. Well, it's not so bad on this one. If they kill this, you get a Thalid. I mean, obviously, like there's things they get rid of this but don't kill it. But this one's great. It's good early, good late, phenomenal, great 2-drop. And just to go to kind of some of the ones that aren't so good, Sunblessed Guardians. This is the 1 in a white 2/2. Transform cost 5 in a Phyrexian red. Flips to a 3/3 on the backside, and when it attacks, it like creates a copy of itself tapped and attacking. Another one, Notvold Hermid. 4 mana for a 4/4, 3 in a green for a 4/4. 5 in a Phyrexian blue. That's 6 mana, or 5 at least. That's really painful. 5/5 on the backside. When it attacks, up to 1 other target creature has base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. And just to, dive into this a little bit, the reason that the cheaper ones are so much better than the more expensive ones is that it's a gigantic tempo blowout for you. If you go to flip your Sunblessed Guardian, spend 5 mana, and they bounce it in response, or they have an instant speed removal spell. At least with the cheaper ones, those have kind of been like, sitting around for a while, maybe even doing something good, and then when you flip it, if they do bounce it or remove it, it's like, all right, I didn't invest as much mana. I can probably still do something in that same turn. And Sunblessed Guardian in particular, this one is 2 mana, but so it's not that cheap. It's not that expensive to just play. But it's a little bit too vanilla for a little bit too long is the problem. It's just a 2/2 for too long. And they're not Voldhammer too. It's like, okay, well, it's 4 mana 4/4. That's like, a passable card. But paying that mana in the late game, that's just really, really tough. I had a game where my opponent had like multiple Sunblessed Guardians, and I had multiple Volcanic Spites, and I was really behind. My opponent had me on the ropes. I was at 3, and they had lethal attackers on board multiple turns in a row, and it just so happened that they went for the flip, and I went, nope, Volcanic Spite. Okay, I survived that turn. You don't have an attack, because I did have 1 blocker. And that happened 3 turns in a row, and I got back into the game. So just be very careful. At very least, if you put the more expensive Phyrexian flip cards in your deck, be very careful about when you flip them. Maybe when shields are down, basically, when your opponent doesn't have mana up. And one more thing I'll say about this, I did experiment a little bit about, like, well, maybe you want a tap land or 2 that, your white-black deck with Sunblessed Guardian, you don't actually have red mana in it. Maybe you want, like, a red-white dual land in there, or maybe even perhaps, like, if you have a bunch of them, maybe you do play, like, a Skittering Surveyor and a Mountain. I've just found it's not worth it. Like, so much of the time, that extra mana source, like the tap land, hurts you, or the basic that you're putting in hurts you, and you really don't mind paying the extra life. Like, life totals tend to be pretty high throughout most of the game in this format because of battles, because of the incidental life gain. You don't feel the pain that much, and a lot of the time, even if you do have the color I noticed, I just chose to spend the Phyrexian mana anyways. So, I wouldn't try to put mana sources in my deck unless you had it for something else. Like if you were splashing another card, obviously that's acceptable. Yeah, it's a little bit of a bonus, but don't go out of your way to put another color in your deck just to flip these things. All right, now moving on to Convoke. So Convoke has been just phenomenal. I mean, part of it is, it's one of the blue mechanics, and that does play a big part. But, cards like Artistic Refusal. This is another sleeper, I think, something that people are not, haven't picked up on just yet. 4 blue for an instant at uncommon, Convoke. Choose one or both. Counter target spell, or draw 2 cards and then discard a card. I think that anything that's expensive and has Convoke, people are underrating a little bit because they look, it's like 6 mana counterspell. That's so expensive. Generally, shave off like 2 or 3 mana when you're evaluating the expensive Convoke cards. And this one in particular is so good. Like, counterspells are a little bit more valuable in this format, certainly because there's expensive bombs. And to that point, something I didn't note when I talked about blue, Assimilate Essence, the 1 in a blue, counter target spell unless they pay 4, and if they do pay that for you, get to incubate 2. You can totally put that card in your deck. It's not as bad as like Scatter Ray was in Brothers War. Totally fine playing that card. Counter spells, like I mentioned, are quite good, and this one's just fantastic, right? A lot of the time, what happens is you go, all right, I'm just like playing my creatures, attacking, blocking, maybe at mostly blocking for in your blue decks a lot of the time, but you just get to cast a spell and keep this up. Like a quote-unquote free counterspell, you slam your own bomb, right? You tap out for it, and they go to remove it, and you go to you counter it with your creatures, right? It's almost like Force of Will in Cube when you like slam a Grave Titan or something. So this card's fantastic. To say nothing of the draw 2 discard a card, because that's also fantastic. Specifically the instants, that's a big deal because I think the sorceries with Convoke or just the creatures with Convoke are a little bit worse. The expensive ones I'm talking, like Shivan Branchburner, the 5 red 4/4 dragon, and like Thunderhead Squadron, the 6 mana blue creature 3/4 flyer. I don't think these cards are that good because tapping out at sorcery speed and not having blockers, that feels meaningfully different. But Artistic Refusal, that counterspell, Collective Nightmare, such a fantastic removal spell. 2 and a black for an instant. Convoke, target creature gets -3/-3. Just phenomenal. Shadow the Source is even a passable card in red-blue. Is the 6 mana Convoke, deal 6, or destroy target artifact. So just, if you are somebody who's been shying away from these expensive instants, just remember that, most of the time, they're not really 6 mana. And I do like most of the cards that have Convoke. All right, and our last mechanic here is Incubate. So I don't have too much to say about Incubates, other than it's just pretty good. There's some questions like preset release that I'd heard. It's like, oh, maybe it's too slow, a little too clunky. No, it's not too slow, too clunky. Most of the things that say Incubate are just, pretty good if they read like a pretty good card. One of them in particular that's super premium, Norn's Inquisitor, or 1 in a white 1/1 that when it enters the battlefield, you incubate 2, and whenever a permanent you control transforms into a Phyrexian, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Notably, that also means the flip Phyrexians too that I was just talking about, but also, of course, it means incubate tokens. This is the best white uncommon by quite a bit. This card's phenomenal. But just, like Blighted Burgeoning, that aura that I was talking about that fixes your mana and incubates too, like, that's just like a good example of you just hack on Incubate onto something, and it does make it, quite a bit better. Same with Assimilate Essence, that counter spell. So, yeah, nothing too strategic. I guess one strategic note I would say is, like, play as well with instants, because you can do it at instant speed. Don't get gotten by your opponent, because the boards do get, like, complex, and I've definitely gotten some opponents just, like, I've had 12 permanents on board, one of them being an unflipped incubate token. It's just like, oh, sorry, flip, block is by 5/5. So just be aware of that. But yeah, thumbs up on incubate. Okay, so let's move into some archetypes now. So I'm not going to be going, I'm not doing a deep dive today. Usually on these state of the format address episodes, I generally just touch on like my thoughts on the archetype, what I like about it, not necessarily exactly you want this, and this kind of thing. Starting out with the best archetype in my mind, blue-black. And, I've been talking about this for a while. And the good thing about blue-black, the great thing about the blue and the black cards, is they don't necessarily lend themselves to a strategy in particular. I mean, they are probably a little bit more controlling, but when I think of the good blue and black cards in the set, I just think efficiency. That's what they do so well. The 2-drops, they're good. The 3-drops, they're good. The removal, they're good. The top end, they're awesome. And you also have awesome cards like Invasion of Amonkhet, which is the one blue-black siege battle that I talked about that flips into a 4/4 clone that clones something in the graveyard. Halo Forger, the 1 blue-black 3/1 flyer that casts a spell out of somebody's graveyard. These are also very powerful cards. So when you're building your blue-black deck, it's kind of up to you based on I would say your higher rarity cards, maybe what your rares ask of you, what direction you really want to lean it, because it can play a pretty good tempo game. You got a bunch of preening champions, you got a bunch of interaction spells, or you can be super grindy with like some good rares and a lot of removal spells. So it really plays a lot of ways. It's hard. The great thing, it's hard to go wrong with blue-black. It's hard to build it in a wrong way because the cards are just so good if you're just taking good cards. So my current strategy has just been like, draft blue-black until I can't, and currently I've been able to do that for most of my drafts that I've wanted to do that, and the ones I haven't like been just trying to explore, do something else. And I'm like, okay, let's just try to win this draft. Just start taking blue and black cards. It'll kind of work itself out. Not only are they really good, but there's also a density of them, right? So I think the table can support multiple blue-black drafters generally. And we're just going to run down the blue archetypes for now. So, because those are the best ones, I think. Blue-white is the next best one. Blue-white Knights. So this is, I think Blue-white Knights is not always how it comes together. And one thing about the archetypes in this set I want to note is because the card pool is so large, not only are there more playable cards in the main set, I think there's almost no Fs, but also you get the Multiverse Legends sheet that adds another 65 cards. Your archetypes are going to look different from draft to draft a lot of the time. It's not always going to, in Phyrexia, I was like, well, I'm black-white, I'm almost certainly toxic, right? Here it's like, well, you can be blue-white Knights, you can be blue-white Tempo, you can even be blue-white Control you a little bit more. But blue-white Knights with Marshal of Zhalfir, the white-blue Lord, the 2/2 that gives your Knights +1/+1, and that has the activated ability blue-white tap another target creature. Phenomenal, one of the best uncommons. If you can get multiple of these, awesome. The more you have of this card, the more you want to lean into actual creature type Knights. But you don't have to for blue-white. It's just like black-white a lot of the time. It's just got good cards. The white part of this this equation is the Knights a lot of the time. But if you are not in that space, you get access to the good white reactive spells like Cut Short, like Alabaster Host, Intercessor, that the white aggro decks don't really want, or at least they don't use as well. So you get to kind of use some underutilized cards as well. I've had a flash flying deck where I had Jada and Errant, the blue-white rare that casts flash cards and flying cards at the top of your library. It was almost like Future Sight. I just went all right, cast a card. You just draw a bunch of cards. There's a lot of small synergies. Blue's just very deep. And so it's a little bit difficult to build it wrong. I would say this archetype's a little bit easier to build wrong because you do have to ask, well, am I the more aggressive Knights deck? Am I a little bit slower, right? You do have to really, I would say as you're drafting, as you're deck building, make those decisions. But at the same time, like I said, it is pretty hard to go wrong with blue cards. Next up, we got Red-Blue Convoke. And this is another deck I've liked quite a bit. Mostly base blue great cards and red interaction spells. The uncommon here, Signpost Uncommon, Joyful Storm Sculptor, 3 blue-red for a 2/3. When it ETBs, you make 2 1/1 elemental red and blue tokens, and whenever you cast a spell that has Convoke, the Storm Sculptor deals 1 damage to each opponent each battle they protect. This is a solid card, but it's not like it's not the key to the deck or anything. You can just play your good blue and red cards. And yeah, you do use the Convoke spells pretty well, especially with Rouse Reinforcements, the 2-mana token maker. That is a key part to the deck. But just like the last 3 archetypes, or the last 2 archetypes, I do think you can build this in quite a few numerous ways. It does play out a little bit more like a control deck because you are sitting back, casting your Convoke instance, doing that kind of stuff. But just, any deck with Preen Champion can turn the corner pretty quickly. So just keep that in mind. It's not like, when I do say control, it's not like hard control, grinding you out. Some decks are going to be that, but most of the time it's like, all right, just remove some stuff, draw some cards, get you in for some flyers, maybe cast my rare or something like that. And blue-red does that pretty well. Next up, we've got black-red, and I'm not calling it sacrifice necessarily. I'm calling it black-red grind, because I think that's more in line with what you're doing in this deck. So, you know, you do have some sacrifice outlets, and you do have Furnace Rains too, which is the active trees, and that card is very good in this set because there's a lot of sacrifice outlets. It's not that hard to steal sack your opponent's thing if you just have black cards in your deck. But where a lot of sets this kind of red-black deck plays out more like an aggressive deck, it is quite grindy in this set. It's a more controlling deck. And I think that Stormclaw Rager, 1 black-red for the 2/2, this is the uncommon, 1 black-red 2/2, 1, sacrifice another creature or artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Stormclaw Rager, draw a card, activate only as a sorcery. This card is a, not like a key tool to the deck, because black has a lot of good ways to grind, but it's a good way to grind, right? It's a good way to, like, sacrifice your fodder, sacrifice your treasures. You know, you draw this in the late game, you're like, all right, cast it, I've got 6 mana in play, I sack 3 things, draw 3 cards, and, you know, you feel pretty good about that. But I would just, you know, the most important thing I would say about this deck is don't frame it as an aggro deck, because the black cards don't play the aggressive game very well. I mean, the red cards also don't play the aggressive game very well. But like, you know, I think that if you're framing it as an aggressive deck, you're going to fall a little bit short. Just kind of frame it as almost like, you know, I was talking about like blue-red, where it's just like, okay, well, good blue spells supported with red interaction spells. That's kind of like this. It's good black spells supported with good red interaction spells. And of course, the black's got good interaction spells too. This is one of the best decks if you, you know, are facing bombs, because you just get to remove a lot of awesome stuff. Next archetype I really like, and I got a shout out to my my co-host, my original OG co-host, Abram, who is now, by the way, playing Magic on the regular back again, and we might have him on for an episode or two. Multicolor green. So he's been drafting up a storm and just like posting these wild lists of just like 5-color green, where, you know, you're just like, have a bunch of lands, have a bunch of the blighted burgeonings, that aura that fixes your mana. I think that black green and blue green kind of blend together a lot of the time. You have like this Sultai base for this multicolor deck that you're just picking up all the bombs that you see. And you know, if anybody has played Khans of Tarkir or has heard of how that format played out, there was this strategy back then, and this was a, you know, Khans of Tarkir was a multicolored format where you just took all the fixing and lands early, and then you got past all the great cards later. And I think you can do that in this set if you want to. I haven't personally done that just yet. I haven't like felt like, all right, just take all the fixing early and pack 2, pack 3 pay me off. But I have definitely started in the green space, not really settled on a second color, and just been like, all right, I'm flirting with black, I'm flirting with blue. Oh, I picked up a really, really good white card. All right, maybe we do actually like mix and match here a little bit. And I think this is a legitimate thing to do. Like any format with a lot of power in it, you're incentivized to get as much of it as you can in your deck. And so if you're somebody who's, you know, your proclivities do lead you towards drafting some sort of multicolor value pile, you can certainly do that here. Okay, and just to close out some of the archetypes I'm a little bit less impressed with. So green-white counters. I don't dislike this deck. I just think it's hard to come together because it needs some key pieces that are at uncommon. So Botanical Brawler, the green-white 0/0 trample that comes in with a 2 +1/+1 counters, and then whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a permanent you control, if it's the first time a counter was put on that permanent, you put a counter on the Brawler. This thing gets out of hand really, really quickly. Like, I was saying, I'm not a huge fan of like the green beatdown stuff. If you have this card, multiple copies, I would want really to move in. That's a real thing, because this is a gigantic threat. You know, I was mentioning the Battle of Moog, the green-white battle. I'm not a huge fan of that one. I think if you have multiple brawlers, that becomes a real card, because if you have even just 3 creatures, this thing gets massive, right? If it's a 2/2, it's gonna become a 6/6 because it gets a counter, and then it sees the other counters put on the other thing, on your other creatures. So it's not a deck I think you want to move into, because I think the commons don't support it that well. Like I said, the commons don't support the aggressive game plan that well in the first place. But if you do pick up a few key cards, another one, Kami of Whispered Hopes, 2 and a green for a 1/1. If 1 or more counters would be put on a permanent, you put another one of those counters, and then it taps for mana equal to its power. If you have Brawler in this card, like you go Brawler into Kami, then, you know, this Kami becomes a 3/3 almost right away. And then gets bigger and bigger and just taps for insane amounts of mana. You can have really mana positive turns, going like, play something, grow the Kami, I get my mana back right away, play something else. Really, really explosive. So I think these 2 cards are pretty key to the deck. I just wouldn't go into it just early on in the draft. I think you want to have it open before you do move in. And then last archetype I want to talk about here is red-white backup. So, I am a lover of aggro. If you know me, I love my aggro decks. Unfortunately, they don't exist in the same capacity as they have in previous sets, which I think is probably good for a lot of players, because I think a lot of players are kind of sick of, feeling like you're dead on turn 3. And the red-white backup deck, led by Mirror Shield Hoplite, this is the red-white 2/2 Vigilance, that whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a backup ability, you copy that ability. And this card is powerful. The problem with it is similar to green-white, right? Where there's just not a huge density of good backup at common. I think if some of the red backup creatures were better, you'd be happier with this, but you're really relying on the white backup commons or some higher rarity cards. And red-white in general just does have some structural issues in the format, and this card isn't as well supported, so I just wouldn't try to draft red-white unless it was just like absurdly open. Alright, and just to close out our archetypes here, one thing I did want to mention is the companions, because they're kind of archetypes in their own. And, Ethan, Lord Tupperware, actually just put a really good video on the Lords Unlimited YouTube channel if you want to check that out. He was talking about, what makes a good companion deck for each of the companions, how to companion them. He ranked them 1 to 10. And I am, Ethan loves companions. That's kind of like his character trait at this point, right? It's a key defining feature of him as a Magic player. And I think that some of them are more viable than others. I'm definitely lower on them than he is. Worth noting, I think he knows exactly what makes them tick, and he's very good at building those decks. But I would say that in general, I think I've seen people companion a little bit too often for some of them. So the ones like Giganta, which is the 5/5 that the companion cost is no card in your deck has more than one of the same mana symbol in its mana cost, right? You can have a black creature or a green creature. I think if you're giving up one card for that, you should companion it. Once you get to like two good cards, you're like, it's kind of painful. Once you get to like, if you have to cut 3 good cards, I just wouldn't. The same goes with Lutri, which is its companion cost is all the cards in your deck are different, right? You can't have any duplicates. I think if you have to give up 2 good cards, don't companion it. If you have to give up 1, that's probably okay. Karuga, I think you should never companion. Zerda, I think it's very difficult to companion. Omori, which is the one that wants all creatures in your deck, or all of one type, and that's going to be creatures. I think that one's also very, very difficult. I think that companioning Luris is the real deal. It's a little bit difficult, but I think you can do it. Gyruda is also pretty difficult, but I think you can do it. That one's a really good payoff. Yorion is the one that I think I most disagree with on Ethan, because Ethan was actually, spoiler alert, put this as his number 1. I think it's generally just not worth having 20 additional cards in your deck. Like, it would be worth companioning Yorion if you had, like, all bangers, all amazing cards, but that's very hard if you're playing all of your cards, or all cards that were, like, kind of medium, right? Like, because the problem with Yorion is you don't draw your best cards as often as you'd like to, right? That's the real problem with the card. And so you want to have a flat power level in your deck, either very powerful or very not powerful, nothing standout. Like if you have a Sunfall in your deck, I'm just never playing Yorion because I want to draw that Sunfall as much as I can. I'll also say that like I'm definitely speaking from like a strictly strategic standpoint. I think there's like a distinction to be made between this is very good to do strategically, like you should do it at the Pro Tour. And the opposite end of the spectrum is you should never do this. It's just not going to work. And there's something in the middle where it's like, I don't think it's optimal, but I also think you could do it if you wanted to. Like if you wanted to flex that, like, you kind of like your creative muscle and be like, yeah, I really want to do this. You're not going to train wreck if you try to companion Gyruda or Giganta. I mean, you have to move off of it if it's not working out, but I'm not like, you should never do this. Don't do this. I'm just saying if you're like trying to play 100% optimally and like trying to win at all costs, I think it's not worth it for most of these, but it's definitely possible if that's, if you do want to try to do that. All right, so we are moving to the latter half of our podcast here, and I just have a few odds and ends here. So I just have a few tips for drafting the set. I've kind of given you the building blocks, but when you actually jump into the draft, what's happening, what's going on? I would say my main piece of advice is remain pretty open in this set, mostly because there's a ton of playables and it's very difficult to get punished by giving up your first 3 or 4 playables. I would say so far this is probably the drafts I've had so far, I've given up my early picks like half the time when I realized, all right, this is open instead. I should move into this. Maybe I start white and then blue-black just happens to be open. That's probably a little bit of that going on where blue-black is undervalued right now. People don't know, and then I move in. But I do think that you have some time. At the end of your draft, you end up with, let's just say you started one color or two colors in the beginning of the draft, and you stayed that way for the rest of the draft. You're going to have like 31 cards that you could potentially play a lot of the time. So don't worry too much. Like, if you see a great card, pick 4, just take it. Especially if it's a splashable card and it's very, very powerful. I was mentioning you don't want to go wild on splashing, but it's definitely a possible thing to do. So yeah, I think that's my biggest piece of advice. I'm probably maybe on a future episode going to go a little bit deep on the navigation of this format, because I think it's really interesting. But just in the early stages of the format, especially if you're somebody who likes to latch onto their early cards, and mind you, if you start with a Sunfall or an Elish Norn, you want to play those cards, certainly. I'm just saying, if your early start wasn't amazing, it was like, okay, pretty good, but not great, be very willing to move off of it, because there are a lot of great opportunities to have powerful cards in your deck. And speaking of deck building here, a tip I would give you is, I would really encourage you, once you're done your draft, put all your cards in your sideboard and rebuild. Like, just go bottom up, take them all and put in the sideboard, bring in the key pieces, the cards you're going to play, and then build around those, right? Because a lot of times you're like sitting on your 30 card or 28 card pile, and you have to make some tough cuts, and you're like, maybe this should go, or this, and as you're drafting, you have this ideal in your head of what your deck is looking like. And because you just end up with so many playables, it's best to just have that core that you want to bring in, your maybe 10 or 11 cards, your premium interaction spells, and your rares, and your premium uncommons. You're like, I know I'm going to play these. And then you put the filler cards or the surrounding cards based on what those other cards need. So maybe you need to fill in your 2-drop slot. Or maybe you do need a few more interaction spells, and you play kind of like a more expensive interaction spell because you didn't get, the premium stuff. Or you have a certain common that interacts really well with one of your rares, right? And you realize, oh, I was going to cut that card because it looks like one of my worst cards in my pile. But if I build this way, I realize, oh, the thing this deck is about is this rare. So I want to be able to play that card. An example of that, actually, is Breach the Multiverse, which is the black, and 5, 7 mana. Each player mills 10, and then you reanimate something from each player's graveyard. Well, that card combos really, really well with Halo Charge Scob, which is the 5 mana 4/4 in blue, that when it ETBs, each player mills 2, and then you put a battle or a spell on top of your library. That's an instant win. I mean, not an instant win. You have to untap and recast Breach, but you mill them for 20, and you're going to win the game at that point. And actually, Halo Charge Scob, for what it's worth, has been a card I've been pleasantly surprised with. It's not a card you just want to play all the time, but if you do have some good spells or good battles, it's certainly serviceable, better than I expected. So yeah, just I think on every deck but one deck I've drafted in this format, I've done the take it all out, put it back in. I think it really helps. All right, last thing to close out here, just before we get to the Q&A section at the end, is I just have a list of notable cards that I wanted to talk about that I didn't feel really fit in anywhere else. Cards I think you should pay attention to. So number 1 here is Scorn Blade Berserker. Single black mana for an 0/1 at uncommon. It's got backup 1, and it's got the ability 1, sacrifice this creature, draw a card. This card doesn't look like that much, but it's one of Black's better uncommons, and it's kind of like Cyber Cryptomancer, the hexproof giving backup creature, where it's just very modular. You can do a ton of things with this card, right? Like, you go, all right, I cast this card, I put the backup counter on something that got gotten by like a Realmbreaker's Grasp or a Stasis Field, I sacrifice that, great, I draw a card, then this sits around, I trump block with it, I draw a card, or maybe you enable an attack with this thing, you don't sacrifice the creature, you put the backup counter on, you get into good attack, maybe you flip a battle with it, then this thing just sits around, you can sacrifice it later. It's 2 sacrifice triggers for the red-black deck that might care about a sacrifice trigger. So very, very modular card. Way better than it looks, I think, if you're just reading. You're like, it's kind of like a weird trinkety thing. You're happy with multiple copies of this. I would play multiple copies in most of my black decks. And the more just like foddery stuff, the more like Thallid tokens you have lying around, the better, for sure. Next up is Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive. So this is 1 in a blue for a 1/3 uncommon. It says creatures you control with power toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. This card's just great. It's not quite like premium uncommon, but it's like just below that. It's a body your opponent has to remove. Like, it's a 2-mana creature that your opponent often has to kill at some point. Not only does it like help peck in at battles or your opponent's life total, but if you have like a 3/1, you have the Cavalier in white, you make that unblockable. The Dread Ship, right? The vehicle, the 4/1 vehicle, that's fantastic. But even if you just have 1/1s, like, I think that a lot of people are like, oh, how many X1s do you have to have, right? Like, large power, small toughness. I mean, that's great if you have those, but even just 1/1s get the job done a lot of the time. Like, if you remember the fish tokens from Streets of New Capenna, those were really, really annoying, and just turning your 1/1s into those That's great. So this card is quite good, and I know this is a card I know a lot of people are underrating right now. One of the top uncommons, Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty. This is 3 green blue for a 3/1 Cascade, and it says spells you cast with mana value 6 or greater have Cascade. And by the way, for folks that haven't played with Cascade before, when you Cascade, you reveal the top cards of your library until you hit a spell that costs less than this, so 4 or less, and then you get to cast it. It's just good value. 5 mana 3/1 comes along with, if you hit a 4-drop, you feel fantastic, but hitting anything feels pretty good as long as it's not like a counter spell or a combat trick. And that clause at the bottom, spells you cast mana value 6 or greater have Cascade. I mean, that's nice if it comes up. You don't have to build around that though. Like, this card is just good on its own. It's just a good value card, good to recur, good to buy back from the graveyard, and like a Sultai grindy deck. Really nice recursion target. So value this one highly, and I don't know if it's quite the level of I would want to splash it, but I would consider it sometimes. Invasion of Mercadia. So this is the 1 in a red battle for defense that when it enters the battlefield, you can discard a card, and if you do, you draw 2 cards. The backside is Chiron Flamewright, 3/3, has the ability 2 in a red, tap it, discard a card. You make 2 1/1 blue and red elemental creature tokens. Those creatures, all your creatures get +1/+1 and gain haste until end of turn. So I was talking about in your aggressive decks, you don't want battles all that much. This is definitely one of the exceptions, because the front side is like perfectly acceptable. You wouldn't always play Tormenting Voice in your red aggressive decks, but it's a passable card. And the backside is ridiculous. The backside is a must kill. It ends the game so quickly. It's also very good in your controlling decks too, because you're just like, all right, filter some cards, and I got this kind of like win condition as the game goes on. But this is one of the better battles, one of the premium ones. All right, and that is it for the main part of the show. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Definitely a long one, but this is one that I felt like I had a lot to talk about. I'm really enjoying the set, so I just wanted to share as much as I could. And there's still, I probably got to like maybe even just like 80% of what I could talk about. There's still a little bit more, I think, even this week. And I think, next week, I'm sure I'm going to have more to talk about. We're going to quickly close the show with a bit of a listener Q&A. I did ask my Discord some questions that folks had on their mind to talk about in this podcast. First question here is from Scrappy Kid, and they say, it would be interesting to hear your takes around playing around Artistic Refusal. This is the 6 mana Convoke counterspell in blue, and the decision space around playing around stuff in main phase 1, as opposed to sandbagging it till main phase 2. Yeah, so the idea here is, if you have Artistic Refusal in hand, you often really hope to cast your opponent casts the spell in their main phase 2, so that you can block and then still have the counter spell up, right? Because a lot of the time, if they cast something in main phase 1 that you really want to counter, and a lot of the time in this set, like I mentioned, you do have people casting battles on main phase 1, you have a bit of an awkward spot because you have to tap your blockers, right? And so I guess what this means is, if you think your opponent has Artistic Refusal, maybe it's a best of 3 game, you've seen it already, try to cast your spells in main phase 1 if you feel like they're holding up mana. And it's kind of hard to always suss out, oh, you have Artistic Refusal, because there's a lot of good instances in the set, certainly. But I guess maybe this applies a little more for you, like when you have Artistic Refusal rather than playing around it, because, like I said, it is a bit hard to predict. I guess you would kind of just want to say, when you're playing out your turn and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to pass the turn, I'm maybe at this point in the game hoping to cast Artistic Refusal, do consider that you're going to have to tap some blockers some amount of the time. So maybe that means you don't get an attack with your flyer that turn. Or maybe it means you don't cast that other spell and then also try to hold up Refusal. You instead have mana up so you only have to tap 1 creature. That is a big thing. Like, Artistic Refusal is very, very good. And I think that the fact that sometimes you have to, go shields down and counterstyling main phase 1, and it's still a good card, it's still performing well, is a testament to how good the card is. But definitely something to consider. And I think, if you are in that spot where it's like, do I want to hold this up? Do I want to cast something else? I would just cast this as like one of the last cards you have. Like, you don't want to have this stranded in your hand for multiple turns, being like, all right, I'm gonna hold up mana because I don't want to tap my blockers, but then they don't cast anything. Maybe they leave up flipping their incubate token. So cast your other spells first might be a good way to think about it. Next question here from Johnny D, and Johnny says, a checklist of things to ask yourself when to attack a battle versus the opponent would be amazing. Yeah, so there's always that tension of like, oh, do I go to the face? Do I attack the battle? How many things do I send to the battle? How many things do I send to my opponent? I would generally say you want to attack battles when you don't think you're that close to closing out the game, right? When you're just like, all right, they're at 15. I think this game's going to go for another maybe 4 or 5 turns. And you do just want that additional resource, that additional creature to attack and block with. Like, that's the broad thing I could say about it. And then when your opponent's at, 5, 6, 7, if you think you can close out the game in 1 or 2 turns of combat, I just would ignore the battle. And, if things go haywire, things like they do interact and they survive somehow, you then have that battle to attack later. You're like, okay, that's always an option, right? So when in doubt, early on, attack the battle. Later, attack the opponent's face. Of course, that changes if you're an aggressive deck. You probably always want to attack the face, or at least most of the time. And like I said, you probably aren't going to have that many battles in your deck anyways. Another thing I would note is just almost like planeswalkers, be comfortable sending more than enough things at a battle if you really want to flip it. Because a lot of times when you're like, okay, I've got 4 creatures, they've got 2 blockers, I'll send 2 of them at the battle, and that's going to flip, or maybe 3 of them, and 1 of them at my opponent's face. Well, if they have an interaction spell, then they kill the one that goes unblocked, maybe they make some good trades, and you're not in that good of a spot. So I'm willing to give up some damage in some spots, especially the higher my life total is, to ensure my battle flips, send more things than I need to at the battle, and be more guaranteed to get the battle. Last question here comes from Zachary, and touching on the complexity of board states and combat would be helpful. I know there's been a lot of games I've lost that I could have won if I considered one small thing, and I know others have mentioned games feeling close or being able to pinpoint one small mistake that spiraled their game. Yeah, so a gameplay episode for this set's going to be awesome. I'm going to really love diving into the minutia of all of it. But just some general thoughts on that, the complexity of the games. Yeah, the games are really complex. Like, I had a game, like, I'm a player that, especially on stream, I play pretty quickly. I do play, I try not to meander on and tank every single turn. But there was a game I was playing, like, a blue-black control deck against a pretty aggressive start from the opponent. And on my first 4 turns, I had so many options, and I tanked, like, 30 seconds on almost all of my decisions. So it can be very difficult. One of the things I would say early on is there's not a lot of ways around it. Like, part of learning a format is learning those complexities and learning what the cards do, and not having to be like, oh, what's that card do again? What's that card do? You eventually get to kind of assimilate that into your being, and then it's not as hard to process all of it. And I would just say learn from your mistakes really would be a big thing, right? You're going to make mistakes. Like, there was a game of NCAA versus Raph Levy the other day, and Raph Levy, all-time great pro, great limited player, made a pretty big mistake, and it cost him the game. That's going to happen. Don't feel bad about it, right? It's a live and learn kind of process. Once you do learn the cards, and if you still feel like you're making mistakes, what I would say is you probably want to just take a bit of a breather a little more often. At the beginning of combat, just say, okay, I know I'm in my head, I'm like, I should attack, but what actually happens when I attack with XYZ creature? Or the beginning of your turn, you draw your card, I've talked about this before sometimes, but it's just like the draw step breather. You take your draw step and you evaluate the board as if it's a new board. You're like, okay, what's going on here? You don't have to do this every single turn, but on some of the more complex games, just taking your surroundings, basically. And that really does help. It really kind of resets your mind, because, things change turn to turn. You can have a game state where you're like, this game's about attacking, and then 2 turns later, your mind is still going, this game's about attacking, but something fundamental about that game changed, and it's no longer about that. So if you find yourself making these mistakes, 1, it's going to happen. That's part of learning a new format. But 2, just take those pauses. Take the pause once in a while. I always say when you're playing a game of Magic, it really helps not to be distracted. This is, to the bane of all streamers out there. And I think, like, don't be watching a video, a YouTube video, or a stream if you really do feel like, I have to win this game, I want to get this game right. Focus on the game, focus on what's important. All right, and that is officially going to do that. Once again, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you like the show, once again, check out that Patreon, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. Any support really does help. And we'll see you next time. I got a lot of guests lined up this coming set, so should have some cool sets or cool episodes coming up. We will see ya next time. Happy drafting.